So my name is Amy Dillett. I'm the Data and Reporting Analyst in the Research and Policy team at QCOS, and I coordinate our Research and Evaluation Network webinars in our online forum. I'd like to begin the session by acknowledging the traditional land, the oldest continuing cultures in human history. I acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal peoples of the lands on which I work here and live in Meanjin in Brisbane. I'd like to pay my respects to all First Nations colleagues joining us online today. QCOS thanks First Nations peoples for the gift of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We look forward to support work leading to a successful referendum to enshrine a First Nations voice to Parliament in the Australian Constitution, followed by Makarrata and Treaty. QCOS welcomes the invitation to walk with First Nations people in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. For those online, please feel free to join us in acknowledging country where you are today through the chat function as well. So as a quick overview for those who may be new to the network, the purpose of the Research and Evaluation Network is about collaboration and knowledge sharing with the intention of identifying shared challenges and emerging issues in the community services sector. This allows us to then respond and provide advice on matters relating to research and evaluation, and it's also an opportunity to share perspectives and shape the QCOS research and evaluation agenda. So you can email us at research@qcos.org.au and we can share with you more details about the network, including our terms of reference. You can also access our Research and Evaluation Network webinar recordings and resources on the Community Door Research and Evaluation Resources Hub page. You can access the page by clicking the link on the slide, and I'll share the links in the chat pane too. We also now have a YouTube channel playlist, so that's where you can catch up on all of our previous Research and Evaluation Network webinars. So I'll just share those links in the chat now for you. They're the links that are about the Resources Hub, and there's also the YouTube playlist and the EOI form for the Microsoft Teams chat that I'll talk about now. So we have this QCOS Research and Evaluation Forum, and that sits within the Microsoft Teams platform. And we currently have 77 members and guests on the forum. And the forum is really the best way to stay up to date with news about the network and upcoming webinars. So joining the QCOS forum is a two-step process. So if you haven't already done this, you can submit a request to join the forum through the QCOS website using the EOI link, which I've just shared in the chat. And when we receive this request form, we'll add you as a guest user and send you a welcome message to the forum. For those that, sorry, if anyone can turn their mute off, that would be amazing. Just getting some noise coming through. So for users that are already on the forum, you may or may not want to turn or check on your notification settings, just so that you make sure you're receiving alerts when people are posting to the team. And you can change your notification settings or preferences two ways, by either clicking on the three dots next to your avatar in the top right-hand corner of your Teams, or on the three dots on the right-hand side of your screen next to the little eye symbol. So if you're having access issues using the forum, just please reach out to us. I've found sometimes removing people and then adding people, again, often fix this access issue. And if it still can't be resolved that way, then I would suggest reaching out to your IT administrator for support. So this is the draft plan for the network for the remainder of 2023. So our next webinar is in September, and we'll have three webinars for that month on all things data visualization. So for October, we'll have a couple of webinars with a focus on qualitative research and cross-cultural evaluation. And then finally in November will be our last webinar for the year on evaluating collaboration and partnerships and incorporating lived experience within evaluation. So this is the last slide from me before I hand it over to Ruth. I just wanted to share some information on the Data Catalyst Network, which is a national group supported by Info Exchange and the Paul Ramsay Foundation. It's specifically designed for not-for-profit sector, and one component of the work is around data capability, and it's a community of practice, so sharing insights and projects at a national scale. They have two upcoming webinars that may be of interest. So there's one right after our webinar here today at 11 o'clock. And the guest presenters for that webinar are Mission Australia, and they're speaking to the details of their deep dive data project on failures and findings. There's also a webinar on Tuesday, the 15th of August, which is around developing not-for-profit data capability. So to register for the Data Catalyst Network events, you need to contact Kristen from Info Exchange, and I'll include the link and more details on the Data Catalyst Network and Kristen's contact details in the chat. So I just thought I'd mention that because it's on today, so that you may want to register for those events for today sooner rather than later, or access the recording for those events. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today's event, Dr. Ruth Knight from the Australian Centre for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Studies. I had the pleasure of first connecting with Ruth a year or so ago. She hosts these wonderful sessions called Tea and Buns. It's a community of practice with a broad focus on topics connecting the not-for-profit sector. And Tea and Buns aims to create opportunities for those working in the nonprofit sector and social innovation to learn from each other and discussing and applying the latest research on to our work. And there's an upcoming session in August, which I'll mention after Ruth's presentation too. So I will now hand it over to you, Ruth. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really, really lovely to have you here today to share all your insights on building a data-driven culture.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Right, hopefully you can see my slides now.
Yeah, okay.
It's great to see all of you here today. Thank you, QCOS and Amy, for hosting these wonderful sessions. They're so amazing. And I just think it's fantastic that we can all come together and discuss some of these topics. So thanks for inviting me. And for the next few minutes, I'm hoping to really start off a good conversation around data-driven cultures and what that means. Now, I want to say straight up, I'm not a data scientist. I don't call myself a data scientist. But I have had 25 years working in community services, and that led me to become very interested in evaluation. And now I am a researcher myself. That is my work at the Centre for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Studies. If any of you have never heard of the centre before or don't know what we do there, please come and check us out. Look at the website or just give me an email, and we'll tell you more about what we do at the centre and how we work with nonprofits throughout Australia and globally. So yeah, it's just lovely to be with you here today, and I'm going to just kick off the conversation today by asking you, because this is going to be a little bit interactive and I am going to ask you some questions. What is your role, and how, if you just pick generally a percentage of your time that you think you use or look at data? So just put your role. I'm just really curious, and that way I'm going to test to see whether the chat is working, because I can only see your links at the moment. Amy, I can't see anybody. Here you go. Thanks, Nicole. All right. So research and evaluation officer, 80%. Okay, good. That's exactly what I want to know. I'm just really curious. Penn is a CEO. How much time do you think, just generally off the top of your head? All right, and then we can see how much time you think in your role you spend looking at or thinking about or collecting data. All right, okay, I can see everybody's found the chat. So we've got some very high percentages, 50, 80, 100%, 70. And it's really nice for me to see who's here. Fantastic to see you. Okay. So quite a lot of your time is spent thinking or looking at, maybe collecting data, analysing data. So this is the conversation that we're going to have today, and I'm going to ask you a lot of questions throughout the next sort of 45 minutes. And if you have any questions for me, please put it in the Q&A section, and that way we won't lose any of your questions. But thank you so much for getting involved in this conversation. Right, now I thought I would start. Let me just see if I can click on my slides. With asking you, have you been on holiday anywhere recently? Have you been away just somewhere nice? Have you had a mid-year break? Because I've just been on my mid-semester break, and very, very fortunate, after 5 years, I was able to go back to England and visit my family in England. Now, I took the kids, and so we went up to London for the day, and I had to decide how we were going to get to the Tower of London. I've never actually, I'm from England and I've never been to the Tower of London, but this was a great chance to take my kids. So I had to think about how were we going to get to London and get around London, and how we were going to get to the Tower of London. Now, many of you will know there's a fantastic subway in London, and the Underground is called the Underground, and so that was one of our options. There's the double-decker buses. These are very iconic to London, and so of course the kids were very keen to go on a double-decker bus. But of course the iconic taxis also are very good in London, and so that was one of our options. And the last one, which we also have in Brisbane here, is those little scooters. They've got Lime scooters now in London. So we were choosing and deciding how are we going to get around London and how are we going to get to the Tower of London. Now, I want to know from you in the chat, which one would you choose? What would you choose? But more importantly, maybe why? How would you choose to get around London, a place which they speak English? So I was fairly confident I could speak the lingo and speak the language and have a look and use this information. Oh, it's nice to see where you've been on holidays. That's good. All right, some people choosing the Underground, the Tube. Oh, a lot of people loving the Underground. Walking. I didn't actually say walking. You're right, Anna. That's another option. So I'm loving why you're choosing it, because that's the real key here, is why. Bus. I love to see where I'm going. That's good, Jordan. I love that. All right. I'm really enjoying listening, like what you would choose, but why? And the reason I'm asking you this is because in your organization, you are constantly, in fact, many of you are looking at data a lot of your time, and you are choosing to decide what data to look at, and then you're making decisions based on that data. But there are many, many reasons why we choose particular data and what we do with that data. Now, of course, when you're going around a country where you don't live there, there are many reasons why you choose make different decisions. And it could be on budget, or what you like to do, what you're comfortable with, what you want to experience. Maybe it isn't that you're comfortable with it, but you want to try something new. And in your organization, all the time, you are faced with these similar kinds of decisions. And that is what is actually creating a lot of your culture within your organization. What are you comfortable with? What are you used to using? What do you want to experience? Why are you using that data? And what are you doing with that data? So I really just wanted to kick off that conversation to explain these concepts that we're going to talk about right now. And the first one is data. This is a concept which may mean different things to different people. So when I say data, what do you think of? Let's put in the chat. What do you think of when I say the word data? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? I really want to know. Numbers. Yes, Rochelle, that's often what people think of. Lots of people now saying stats, numbers. Ooh, Andrea said a story. That's good. Information, results, statistics, metrics. Love it. Information, trends, qualitative information. Yes, evidence. That's good. Numbers. Okay, a lot of you saying numbers, and that is so true that many people in your organization, when you say the word data, they'll think of numbers. What happens then, folks? What's the next thing they think of, or they're saying to themselves? Oh no. All right, because data is often very synonymous. Now, if you're working with data a lot, I'm really pleased that you're thinking of other things, because data is not just numbers, and of course it includes numbers, but it's not just data. Now, I want to share with you that I actually got to the Tower of London, and this is a photo that I took as I was trying to see this gentleman here. Does anybody know who this is? He is called a yeoman warder. He is a beefeater, as many of you will know the name beefeater. He's a yeoman warder. And what these yeoman warders do is they walk around telling stories about the Tower of London and what used to happen there and all the history that goes on. And so you can see everybody was trying to crowd. This was the closest I could get to him, because everybody was crowding around, keen to see and hear the stories of what he was saying and sharing about the Tower of London. And now, obviously, it's not just him. There's lots of other stories, and this was another photo I got. It was about the toilets in the Tower of London. It's all very, very interesting when you walk around and you're visualizing a lot of the history, but you don't understand it. And you don't know it until you start hearing stories. And of course, when you've got the kids there and it's very interactive, that was when we started talking about these stories and talking about the history and started to reflect on what it would be like, because my daughter is 16 and all she wanted to do was go to castles. And that's why we went to the Tower of London, because we thought we'll start there. And when we started to talk about history, I started to say, would you really like to live here, etc., etc. So we started to really reflect on what the data was telling us, what our visual data was telling us, what the stories were telling us. And so all of this is data. And I want to remind you, but I think you know this, is that when we start to use data and numbers too much, when it's only ever those two words together, people forget that data is not just numbers. Of course it is numbers, but it's not just numbers. And it's what we do with those numbers and how we talk about those stories, etc., all that data. That is what starts to create a culture. The culture in our organization is the way that we think and we talk about stuff, how we talk about the services that we provide, the way that we work with our beneficiaries. Culture is just everything that we do within our organization. And so when I say culture and put the two words data and culture together, that's when we start thinking about, well, how do we use data? What do we think about and talk about in our organization when we talk about data? So when I'm speaking right now, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts. What do you think the culture is right now? I saw one person just up in the chat put fear. But is there other types of things that you think of with throughout your culture? Now, this is not just in your department. It's not just you. I'm thinking about generally. Culture is generally throughout your organization, what people think and feel about data. So can you pop in the chat? What do you think people generally feel when you talk about data? What do they do? And then we're going to do really keen to hear, what do you think people think and do? Okay, I don't have time. Bored. Glaze over. Yes. Switch off. Overwhelmed. Yes. These are very, very common things. Might not be you because you're here and you probably love data, but I'm talking generally across the organization. Extra work, yes, pressure, so much reporting. It's all about compliance, isn't it? Graphs, yes, Lisa. People go, no, it's graphs, yes. And this is generally how we kind of start to analyze what people are thinking and feeling in your organization about data. So I want to actually do a quick little poll with you. Can we just throw up this poll? And I'm going to ask here, generally, how do people throughout your organization feel about using data to guide their decisions and strategies? So Michael's popped a little data poll, a little poll, and I'd like you to just pick generally. Do you think they use data positively, have kind of mixed feelings about using data, or are they resistant? They kind of don't really want to do it, but they will do it if they need to, or are they just negative about it? No, don't want to do it. I'm really, really keen, because this is again your way of seeing not just what they think about data, but how they're using data and how they're actually getting the benefits out of the data. Let's see what you're saying. Okay, so far we've got 23% saying positive, good. We've got 53% saying mixed feelings. We've got 23% saying resistant. Nobody saying negative, that's good. All right, fantastic. All right, you can all see that, can't you? Jesse, Justin, can you just nod your head if you can see that poll? Right, okay, excellent. All right. Excellent. All right. So that's a really good indication then of your culture and whether people are not fearing data, I suppose, not or being resistant to data, but then actually using that data for a really good purpose, which is to solve problems, to guide decisions and create strategies, and perhaps even do innovation, okay, based on this data. So what is this continuum then between kind of being data driven right through to not being driven at all? Here, and I'm going to just show you these little words here, and I don't know if you're familiar with these kind of concepts, but the first one is really data denial, and that's that kind of negative, I just don't want to know about data, I don't agree with it, I don't even believe in it, I'm really not trusting how the data is collected, what the data is telling me. So there may be people in your organization, or this may be your culture, that people just deny it completely. Then we get to a little bit more around indifference. So people go, yeah, I know data is good, but it's just for compliance. It's just once a month when I have to write a report, or it's, you know, I'll do it if you tell me I have to. That's kind of when people know they have to do it, but they're not really engaged with what data is or how it can be used. And then we've got data aware, which is where an organization knows that it should be collecting data and it is collecting data, but they're not really, again, utilizing it well. They're using it for reporting. Maybe it's a lot of output data, but not much outcome data. All right, so it's a bit of a selection process, depending on how literate people are and the technology that you have and how interested people are in it. And then we have data inspired. So data inspired is really when you know that you have data and you're just kind of exploring it and using it to kind of inform you. So what is it telling you? Is it telling you about output data? So how many people are you working with, or how many beds were, you know, used last night, etc. So whatever your services are you using it to just tell you things? All right. Now, after this, though, we come to data informed. And data informed is where we're really now starting to use the data much more wisely, I suppose, but we're not using it just to tell us stuff, but we're using it to start now informing our future strategy. We're using it to actually tell us where our outcomes are good or not so good, or where our outputs could be better, our performance indicators, our metrics, and we're sort of learning, and we're becoming a learning organization because of the data that we're collecting and analyzed. So that's data informed. And then the last one is really a word word called data fluency. And I like this term because I think it really talks about how fluently we're using that data within our organization. So are people excited about the data that they're collecting? Are they using it to inform themselves, but then are they thinking about, well, what does that teach us? How can we innovate based on that data? How can we communicate that data? What strategies could we develop because of the data and what's it telling us? So I'm wondering again, please share in the chat. Can you see yourself or your organization on this dial, on this continuum? And there's no judgments here, by the way, because really organizations sometimes go depending on who the leader is or what's going on in the organization or what they think their technology is. There's all lots of different reasons why you might be sitting on this dial at any given point. But there's just to learn about your culture, it's really important to ask yourself, well, why do we think and act this way? Why is this our culture? Now, there was a really great report that came out of an organization, a social enterprise actually, called Data Orchard. They produced a report which was from organizations based in the UK. And I thought that that report had a lot of similarities to Australian organizations because they said that there were a lot of challenges for organizations to become data fluent. And I don't know if you think any similar, that they said the biggest challenges to become data fluent or at least data informed was upskilling staff and developing the capabilities that staff need to collect and analyze data to enable them to inform their strategies. And these are some of the biggest challenges that we have across the sector in human services, that we may feel that we don't have the technology or we don't have the knowledge or the skills. And that is holding us back from really becoming fluent in the way that we use and collect and use data. So I was thinking back to what does it mean to be data fluent? And I was thinking about my daughter again, my 16-year-old who came to London with me, and she's actually just learning to drive at the moment. She's got about 50 hours under her belt, which is about halfway to 100. So she's okay. I will let her have the keys to the car if I'm there, but she's not ready to do a lot of the things, and she can't pass her test yet. So she's not really fluent in how the road rules work, and she couldn't pass her test yet. She's got at least another 50 hours before she's really ready to be on her own on the road. And I was thinking that's often where we sit as organizations. We feel that we're still kind of learners. We still feel that we might not have enough hours under our belt to be really able to utilize that data well, or we feel like we still need someone with us to guide us and teach us how to use and analyze data. And that can really be very, again, holding us back from becoming this really fluent person who can take the car in any weather and drive and decide where to go and make those decisions based on our competence and our capabilities as an individual or as an organization. So I'm really keen to hear, what is it again for you that may be holding you back or might encourage you to become more data fluent? These are some of the questions that I think organizations are asking themselves. So how effectively does data inform and drive your decisions? This is what is really interesting to learn. Now, data analysis then, and again, remember, I'm not just talking about numbers. Please remind yourselves, and I'm reminding myself, I'm not just talking about numbers. We are talking about all forms of data and the data that's coming into us and how are we analysing that data? Who is analysing that data, and who is communicating that data to the people that have some insight into that data? Because decision making should never be one or the other. It shouldn't be based just on data, and it shouldn't be just based on insight, because it's very dangerous if you only do one or the other. If you only rely on data, there's a lot of assumptions being made. But if you only rely on experience and what you think, again, we're relying on assumptions and maybe your experience and what you think. So it's really important to try and, excuse me, it's really important to try and think about, well, who is analysing the data? How are we doing that? And then how are we building consultation with our stakeholders? And those stakeholders can be anyone in your organisation, your beneficiaries, your funders, your donors. It could be anybody has insight into what that data might be telling you. And based on that, then what kinds of decisions and strategies are you making? So I want to ask you a question for the chat, please. What is your challenge? What is your biggest challenge when it comes to analysing and reflecting on the data to help you make good decisions? I'd really love to hear that. What are the challenges? QCOS is really interested to hear what this is as well, because it might lead us to think about what is the challenges for human services around this. So what is it? Time poor, time pressures. Time, yeah. Oh, a lot of you saying time. Interesting. Capturing outcomes, yes. Confidence in the quality of the data. Okay, great. I'm going to pick up on that one, Kerry. Data not being collected or poorly collected, no resources, systems, staff training. Brilliant. Well, no, it's not brilliant. It's not great, is it? Because those are the things that really challenge us. But it's very interesting to hear that we're in a similar boat. All of us, we're facing some very similar challenges. So let me just talk about fear then, because I am going to pick on the idea that lots of people get very fearful about data, the way it's collected, the way it's analysed, or even the interpretation of the insights that we gain. Now, does your team fear data? This is one of the really biggest, and I think somebody said, was it Kerry who said, feeling overwhelmed with data can be one of the reasons that people fear data. And unfortunately, in our sector, we are constantly being asked to comply. So we have to do reports. It might be internal reports, or it might be external to donors or funders. We're constantly being asked to report on different things, often with numbers. And basically that can overwhelm your service delivery staff because they're not used to doing that, or they don't want to do that. You know, they feel that that's just an added burden to their job. And so this can increase their fear of being asked to look at the data, collect the data, and come up with some strategies based on the data. So overwhelm is one of the reasons that creates that fear. Now, the other one is knowledge, just basic knowledge about how to analyze data and what to look for in that data. Now, this Dunning-Kruger effect is based on Dunning-Kruger's work. They're psychologists, and they did a lot of work on confidence and wisdom, and where how we know things and how we base our decisions. And they talk about the fact that when you have a little bit of confidence, you very, very quickly get to this Mount Stupid idea. And by the way, that is not my terminology. Okay, this is the terminology of Dunning and Kruger, who say that there is this Mount Stupid that people get to very quickly based on a little bit of confidence. Unfortunately, though, that is very quick downward slope when people realize, actually, I don't know much. And that downward slide after the peak of Mount Stupid leads us into something they call the Valley of Despair. And the Valley of Despair is when you realize, actually, I really don't know too much about this topic, or I really don't know about what the data is telling me, or even how to reflect, or how I use data competently to make good decisions. And so if you find that a lot of people are fearing data, it could be that they're on this downward slide, is that they have some knowledge and they do have some experience. They can use some form of knowledge around how to collect data, not just numbers, but stories and feedback and visuals, etc. They might have some knowledge of how to collect that, but it's once you ask them to tell you what it means and why is it saying that, that's when they can start to get that really big fear. So what can you as leaders who are interested in driving your culture to a better place? Well, one of the things you need to do is find out why people fear data. Okay, and I'm interested, is anyone saying in the chat that they get this, they understand this, this is ringing true for their organization? Because what we need, I think, is to really think about how are we already using data. Are we actually, as an organization and as people who love data, because I'm going to make a massive assumption that most of you on this line and here today love a bit of data, all right, how are we actually communicating to the rest of our team and the rest of our organization? And words and jargon like correlation is one of the worst things that we can do and say to our service delivery staff, okay, and the people in our organization, because that type of terminology and that type of language can get people very scared, and it can actually get them to the peak of Mount Stupid real quick, because they go, oh, I know what correlation means. And then you get the department head or your team leader saying, well, we found this correlation in the data, so we're going to do this, folks. And everybody's going, what? No, that doesn't make sense at all. All right. And when you don't have a feedback culture where people can actually discuss, debate, reflect on, is that right? Does that make sense? That's when you shut down the culture and people start to go, no, I don't want to look at data. I don't believe in it. We're making really stupid decisions based on data. Does anybody get that? Is anybody realize how important it is to make sure that the language that we're using, the space that we are giving people to reflect on data is so critical? Now, I just wanted to, recommend and really, you may already be doing this, but as we think about how we build a culture that loves data, that uses data well, we need to think of ourselves. I love this picture because I really think this is the posture that we should be taking throughout our organization. Whereas you, as people who love data, using data a lot, feel comfortable with it, are we really encouraging other people within our organization to build that confidence to use data well? And I've got 3 little tips for you if you as a leader really want to build your culture. And the first one is have empathy with people, really find out why they're fearful, why they don't love data, what their misconceptions are about data collection and data analysis and how you're using it in your organization. So have empathy with people. It's think back to when you were, just starting to get into data and evaluation, and think about what you were learning, and really encourage them, but have empathy with them. And then the second one is think about what you're doing and saying, often unconsciously, because as you become confident, you're starting to use a lot of this jargon, and you're creating a culture by what you're doing and saying. And so be really mindful of what you're doing and saying. Is it making people more interested in data and evaluation? Is it making people more confident, or is it making people more fearful? And the third one is build your own fluency first. Now, I could have shown a picture of, in the aeroplane with you putting your own mask on first, because obviously when you go in an aeroplane, they always say, put your own mask on so that you can help others afterwards. And again, I think that's a good analogy for saying, put your own mask on. If you are using data a lot, which many of you at the beginning of the call said you were, get your own fluency, build your own capabilities, and really start to become confident so that then you feel able to take people along the ride with you. So build your own confidence. So there's just 3 little tips there. Okay, we've got a few little more minutes, and I'm really loving the chat and listening to what some of the issues are for you. I wanted to give you another tip, I suppose, or this is just something I love. It's an exercise called the sea boat exercise. Anybody use the sea boat exercise? The sailboat. It's sea boat, sailboat. Does anybody use this? You can use it in so many different ways, but I love it when I'm talking to people about culture. And what you can do is you can get people to draw this, or you can take one off the internet. There's lots of them on there, and you can just ask questions about the culture based on this. So the first one that you might ask is, what do people want to achieve with their data? Just go and talk to people about it and say, what are the problems that you want to solve within your department or within your area of operations or your service area of, your service? What do you want to do and achieve with data? Get them talking about that. And then say, well, if you want to do that, what kind of capabilities and support do you need? Is it technology? Is it data analysis? Is it time? Because loads of you said time was a barrier for you. Go out and ask people and your stakeholders, what do they need? And then you can start assessing what will build that culture. Ask them what the constraints are, because if they say time, well, maybe they have the capability, but they just don't have time. And then you can sort of co-design how you could build in more specific time to actually look and reflect on the data. So go and ask them what their constraints are. And the other one is, what are the risks of collecting and analysing data? They will tell you what their fears are, because they will say, this is all about compliance, or it's not really telling us anything, or it's all about numbers and we're not actually listening to people's stories enough, or etc., etc. They will give you some insights into why there is fear, or why they're just not doing it, and why the culture is holding them back. So I hope you like that exercise, and that's a little idea for you to go back and do. Now, I'm going to suggest that when you do that exercise, you are going to find that the challenges are in one of these 3 areas. It's either in the data production and governance of data. Is it the systems? Is it the technology? Is it about who is collecting that data and how you're collecting it? Is it about data analytics and analysis? Is it about who's doing that, when it's being done? Is it too late? If you're only doing data analysis once a year at the end of a funding cycle, that's probably too far. It's too long away. People need data now very quickly. They need it regularly. They need to reflect on it. Sometimes daily. We need to know what's going on in our organizations. And then the biggest amount of problems will occur with the data consumers, the people who actually need to use that data and who want to reflect on it and use it for developing further strategy. So I want you to imagine for a moment that data is the fuel to your organization. Data, all types of data, is the fuel to your organization. If using that analogy, what kind of car are you driving? How is it powering up your car? Is it a well-oiled engine? Is it a well-powering, machine? Or where is the problem in your engine? And what is creating this culture perhaps of fear or just mistrust in data and not using it well enough to drive your decisions. So really using this to help you understand your culture is important. Now, there's many other things you can go and have a look at to help you think about data fluency. There's frameworks, but again, you're going to find that all of this talks about consumers and producers. And if your consumers and producers, whoever they are in your organization, are not talking to each other, they're not working together, they're not listening to each other, that is where the culture is going to be suffering, because it's absolutely imperative that producers and authors and consumers are talking together. So I wanted to share quickly, because I know we're running out of time, and I hope this is what I'd love to know. What are you thinking right now? But I wanted to share two quick stories, and then we'll close and we'll see if you've got any questions. Some of you may have heard of this story, and this is one of my favorite stories. And it's a story that comes out of a book called Creative Confidence. And it's the story of a guy called Doug Dietz, who was a researcher, but he was a researcher using human-centered design. I hope you love human-centered design. I do. Now, human-centered design is a process where you have a look at the data, that means stats and stories, and you use it to really think about innovation and think about strategy. And so Doug was asked to go to a hospital and have a look at the MRI machine that they used with children. And he looked at all the data and he saw that 80% of the children, the sick children who were being asked to have MRIs, were having to be sedated. 80% of them, because it was a horrible procedure. It's they need to stay still. So that meant that the hospital was spending an awful lot of money on anaesthetists. The parents were stressed out. Some of them needed to be sedated as well. It was just, not a great place for children and parents to walk into. And so Doug, after looking at both the stats and the stories, because he did a lot of consultation and speaking to the doctors, to the parents, and to the children themselves, and said, what is it about the MRI machine in this room that you don't like? And so he used that data to then create a solution. And this is what is so exciting. If you haven't seen this, this is what they came up with. And they changed the whole perception of this room. And I just love the fact that they collected the data after they did this, and they found that patient satisfaction went up 90%, right? That there were definitely less sedations. In fact, what happened, the knock-on effect of the positive outcomes for the children, was that then the health costs for the organization, they just didn't need as much anaesthetists. And they could do more MRIs because they were reliant less on anaesthetists coming. And the cool story in the book is that one little girl goes up to Doug when he's going back and actually looking at the impact. One little girl, in fact, I want to cry. She came up to Doug and she said, I've asked my mummy, when can we come back? Now, how cool is that? That you can use data to not only inform you and tell you what's going on, but you can use data to really improve outcomes for people and really change and innovate what it is that you do. So that's one of my, coolest stories that I love telling and discussing. So really, why should we then have a data-driven culture? Well, I believe it's because all about trust and learning together. If you can instill that within your organization, that data is, all forms of data are great and that we learn from that, that is what I think will really improve our sector. Now, one final story before we finish up. So I hope you're putting a few questions in the Q&A. This is a lovely photo that I got from Bundaberg Now, which is the newspaper up in Bundaberg, and these are the lovely ladies that work in Meals on Wheels. And we all know the beautiful Meals on Wheels organisation who make dinners for elderly or those who are isolated. And they report in this story that over 50 volunteers in Bundaberg region deliver over 160 meals per day. Now, I love that. That's great stats. That's great data. Okay, good data about the people and the meals that they're making. But the other story that actually isn't in this newspaper story that I always enjoy listening to is that one of these ladies, and I don't know if she's from Bundaberg, to be honest with you, but there was a Meals on Wheels lady who said, I've been filling out these forms for our funders and our donors for years, making meals every day and telling them how many meals that we've made. But no one has ever asked, how does it taste? And again, I think that's a real reminder for me that stats are great, but what's the stories? What's the human interaction with data and how are we learning by using our data? So please, go back and continue the conversation with your organization about what are we doing, what are we saying, how are we building this culture, how are we becoming fluent so that we can understand people's experience, that we can improve outcomes. If we're doing that, what a great community and sector we're going to be if we can do that. So as we just do some questions, if we've got time, Amy, I thought I'd just let you know that if you want to do a deep dive where we go into much more about this, I'm going to put on a one-day course called Storytelling with Data. Very lovely Hand Heart Pocket, a funder, has come together with us and said we want to help more organisations learn more about this. And so there is a subsidy provided for non-profit organisations if you want to come and join us at QUT on the 6th of November. So I'll just leave that there, Amy, and see if there is any questions. Is there anything burning?
Thanks so much, Ruth. That was wonderful. There's nothing in the Q&A section.
Oh.
So maybe perhaps there's comments coming through in the chat. I think a lot of thank yous. Yeah.
Oh, and thank you for putting the handout, the link to the handout that Amy has just put. I've put a lot of those questions that I've asked you today in that handout because I thought maybe hopefully you were just thinking and today and discussing in the thing. So I've just put that handout together. Go there, download it. It's just literally, I've just thrown it up on the website so that you can take it away and use it within your own team and organisation. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. All right.
So, yeah, I think we've never had such a busy chat channel there. So thank you very much for the engaging content, Ruth. I think it really resonated with me, a lot of the challenges that people were coming up with. We did a survey with our members last year around the challenges in all things data related, using and collecting and analyzing data. So yeah, a lot of that was reflected in those comments too. And I think it was really good, the importance of how you reflected on, creating a feedback culture. I think that's something that I will take away with just allocating some more time to reflect within our teams on what the data means and how we can use it better. I really also loved the how you incorporated all of the driving component within the whole presentation and that data fluency continuum. I thought that was really great. So yeah, really wonderful. If there is more questions, I'm just checking, but everyone's just saying thank you. So I might just share, I've got some final slides just for other opportunities that are coming up as well, and some QCOS events. So if there was no other burning questions, I'll just check the Q&A one more time, but we'll just see there. Yep.
And if there is anything that you think of, just give me an email and I'm happy to receive emails.
I shared your details in the chat section as well. I hope you don't mind. So I'll just share my screen again. Can you see the question slide on the screen? Great. So yeah, just before we all go, I wanted to share some upcoming QCOS webinars and opportunities with you all. And I'll share these in the chat as well, just in case people do need to rush off early. So just bear with me for a second and I'll copy and paste these into the chat. So firstly, the Queensland Community Impact Awards recognise and celebrate our sector's contribution across 4 areas. So there's 4 awards this year, the Community Impact Award, the Frontline Hero Award, the Human Rights Award, and the Neighbourhood Centres Award, which is new for this year. So for details and to nominate, you can go to qcos.org.au/awards. And also just to flag that the nominations were extended and will now close on the 31st of July. The next thing I wanted to flag was for August. I'm also working on a webinar with Stacey from QCOS and her project on skilling Queenslanders for work. So I thought I'd share that event with our network here today because the topic is around using data in grant writing and funding applications. And anyone is welcome to register for the event, and we'll cover how to find freely available data sources and interpreting and using data in your funding applications. And so that webinar is coming up on the 9th of August. Ruth, while we're on the topic of writing grants, so you've also got your next tea and buns session, which is what I was talking about earlier. So Ruth is hosting this event on grant writing and Chat GPT online. And so that's a free event and it's on the 31st of August at 9 a.m. And then we've also got September, which I mentioned before, around the Data Visualization Month. So our network will host 3 events in September, one on data presentation best practices. There's a data storytelling topic around principles as well. So I think that links really nicely with your, is it November? November event. We'll share the links to that event as well. And then communicating impact and purpose with data. And so registrations for these events aren't online yet, but I will share them with the network when they become available. And then lastly, we have our in-person town hall events. And so these town hall events have been held for the last few years at various locations across Queensland with the community services sector. And so in these sessions, we talk about emerging issues and community priorities. And it's an opportunity to engage with the work of QCOS and inform our research and advocacy work for the year ahead. So our town halls are the basis of our Queensland budget submission. So for example, feedback from previous town halls have informed our asks for more social housing, better renting rights, and more appropriate indexation for social service organisation contracts. Personally, I really like these events are one of my favourite QCOS events for the year because we get to meet face to face with our members and people who are working in the community sector. So I also really enjoy them because there's a data component to this work. So we collate these town hall community data profiles and which can then be used to support and inform conversations at the town hall events and provide context and community data on different issues such as housing and homelessness, youth justice and cost of living. So these town halls for this year are being held across various states from Thursday the 3rd of August, which I think might be next week, and to Friday 20th of October. And they're in various locations including Toowoomba, Logan, Gympie, Townsville, Rockhampton, Brisbane, Mount Isa, Mackay, Moreton Bay and Cairns. And so I shared the link to how to register for those events as well. So thanks again for joining us. A really big thank you to you, Ruth, for your time and energy today. We really appreciate you connecting with the network and we'd love to have you anytime. So thanks again for staying online and engaging with us all, everyone. We have some final polls for this webinar today. So if you can give us some feedback on how we went for today's session, that would be amazing. Thank you. So I hope everyone has a really wonderful rest of their week. And thanks again. And I look forward to connecting again in September.